The trial. What if one morning your account was suspended for no reason you could find? A modern retelling of Franz Kafka's The Trial. Chapter 1. The Notice. Someone must have reported Joseph K., for without having done anything wrong, he was locked out one morning. He noticed it at 7:14 a.m. before he was fully awake, in the way that everyone now receives the most important news of their lives. As a notification, gray and small, at the top of a screen he had picked up out of habit before his eyes had properly focused. He assumed at first that he had mistyped his password. This happened. He typed it again carefully, and the screen did not open into the familiar world of his account. The messages, the years of photographs, the saved conversations, the two-factor keys to a dozen other services, the whole quiet infrastructure of his adult life, but into a pale rectangle bearing a sentence he would come, over the following weeks, to know better than his own name. Your account has been suspended for violating our community guidelines. Below it a single button, Learn More. He pressed Learn More. It took him to a page listing in general terms, all of the things a person could conceivably do to violate the guidelines: harassment, spam, impersonation, coordinated inauthentic behavior, dangerous content, 7 other categories, without indicating which of them, if any, applied to him, or when the violation had occurred, or what specifically he had said or done, or who had decided it, or whether a person had decided it at all. The page ended with another button. If you believe this was a mistake, you can submit an appeal. K was 34. He was a senior analyst at a firm whose exact business does not matter, because it never mattered to anyone including him. What mattered was that he was competent, orderly, well-regarded, a man who had spent his whole adult life on the reasonable assumption that systems, in the end, work. That behind every process there is a person, and behind every person a reason, and that a reasonable man, presenting himself reasonably, will in the end be dealt with reasonably. He read the pale rectangle a 4th time and he was not afraid. He was, if anything, mildly irritated in the way one is irritated by a parking ticket issued in error. Obviously it was a mistake. He had done nothing. He would submit the appeal and a person would look at it and see that he had done nothing, and it would be resolved, probably by lunch. He submitted the appeal. There was a form. The form asked him to describe why he believed the suspension was made in error. He wrote reasonably, "I have not violated any guideline. I don't know what I am alleged to have done. Please specify the content or behavior in question so that I can respond to it." He read this over, found it firm but polite, the letter of a reasonable man, and submitted it. A new gray rectangle appeared. "Thank you. Your appeal has been received. We'll review it and get back to you." Reviews typically take 2-3 business days. You will not be able to submit another appeal while this one is pending. He put the phone down. He made coffee. The irritation had a pleasant edge of self-righteousness to it, the anticipatory satisfaction of a man who knows he is in the right and will shortly be proven so. He went to work. He did not yet understand, how could he, that he had just done the single most damaging thing available to him, which was to engage. That the reasonable letter, the firm but polite letter, the letter demanding to know the charge, had entered him into the process, and that the process, once entered, does not release what it holds, and that from the moment he pressed submit, he was no longer a man to whom a mistake had happened but a case, an open case, a file with a number, moving through a machine that had no exit marked on any of its pages. The reply came in 11 days, not 2 to 3, and it was not a reply. It arrived at 3:02 a.m. He saw the timestamp later, and it unsettled him more than the content. That hour, the machine hour, the hour that proves no human hand was near it, and it read in full: "Thank you for your appeal. After careful review, we have determined that your account will remain suspended for violating our community guidelines. This decision is final. We are unable to provide additional details about specific violations for privacy and security reasons. Thank you for your understanding." Kay read it standing in his kitchen at 40 the next morning, and for the first time, a thin, cold thread of something that was not irritation went through him. After careful review, 11 days and a reply at 3 a.m. final providing no detail but careful, reviewed carefully, by whom, he read it again. We are unable to provide additional details about specific violations for privacy and security reasons. He turned this sentence over. Privacy? Whose privacy? Security against what? The sentence had the shape of a reason, the grammar of a reason, and no reason in it. It was a reason-shaped object placed in the slot where a reason goes, and he understood dimly that this was deliberate, that the sentence had been written precisely so that it could not be argued with, because you cannot argue with a thing that does not say anything. He could not contest the charge, because there was no charge. He could not defend his conduct because no conduct had been named. He had been found guilty. This decision is final of an unspecified violation, at an unspecified time, by an unspecified process, and told that the details of his own guilt would be withheld from him for his own protection. He noticed, too, and this he noticed with real fear, the sentence "Thank you for your understanding," as though he had already understood, as though understanding were the natural and expected response, as though a reasonable man receiving this would nod and accept, and only an unreasonable one, a guilty one perhaps, a resentful one would fail to understand. The sentence was not thanking him. It was instructing him. It was telling him what the correct emotional posture was, and it was telling him that this posture was already assumed on his part, so that any other posture would be a deviation, a further mark against him. He submitted a second appeal. There was, despite what the first rectangle had said, a way to submit another, buried 3 levels down under a heading called something else. And this time his letter was longer and less firm and more polite, and he caught himself, midway through writing it, doing something he would think about for a long time afterward. He caught himself explaining that he was a good person, not that the decision was wrong, that he was good. "I've been a member for 9 years, he wrote. "I've never been warned about anything. I use the account mainly to keep in touch with family. I'm not the kind of person who—" He stopped. He read the phrase back. "I'm not the kind of person who—" 11 days into a process whose charge he still did not know, he had already begun, unprompted, to plead his character. To defend not his act, there was no act but himself, his nature, his innocence as a quality of his soul. No one had asked him to. The machine had not accused him of being a bad person. And yet the machine's silence had produced in him, all on its own, the conviction that he stood accused of exactly that, and that his job now was to prove to no one, against no charge, that he was good. He sent the second appeal anyway. It was 7:14 a.m. exactly, 1 week to the minute from the first notification, though he did not notice this, and it would not have helped him if he had. Chapter 2: The Office. The suspension began, over the following 2 weeks, to spread, not dramatically, not all at once, but the way water spreads under a floor, appearing in rooms you did not know were connected to the leak. First, the account he had used to log into other things stopped working as a key. He had, like everyone, built his life on a small number of these logins, and the suspended one had been a master key to perhaps a dozen doors, a photo archive, a music service, 2 shopping accounts, a food delivery service, the app he used to unlock a rental scooter, the account that held 9 years of a running message thread with his sister who lived abroad and with whom he communicated almost entirely through it. When the master key was frozen, the dozen doors did not announce that they were locked. They simply, one by one over days, stopped recognizing him, each with its own small gray rectangle, each rectangle referring him back to the master account to resolve the issue, the master account which could not be resolved, so that he was routed politely, endlessly, back to the single locked door at the center of everything, from every direction, by every service, all of them agreeing with perfect courtesy that the solution to his problem lay behind the one door that would not open. Then his payment stopped. This frightened him more than anything so far because it touched money which he had believed to be the one domain still governed by the old reasonable rules. A subscription he'd paid for years declined. When he investigated, a notice informed him that unusual activity had been detected on his account and that, as a precaution, certain functions had been limited pending verification. He had not moved money strangely. He had done nothing. But the word had spread, that was how he came to think of it, though he had no evidence for the mechanism. The word that he was, in some unspecified way, a flagged person, an account associated with a violation, had spread from the first system into the others the way a name spreads on a list, and now systems that had no connection to the original suspension, that were run by entirely different companies, that could not possibly know what he was alleged to have done because he did not know what he was alleged to have done, had nonetheless begun, quietly, to treat him with the specific wariness reserved for the guilty. He tried to reach a person. This is the part of his account that K would tell later, to the few people he told, with the particular flat exhaustion of a man describing a recurring dream. There was no person. He does not mean that the people were unhelpful. He means that he came, over many hours, many days, to doubt the existence of the people at all. Every path he took, the help center, the support form, the chat window with the cheerful name, the community forum where other suspended users posted their identical stories into a void. Every path curved, eventually, back to the same small set of pre-written rectangles, arranged in different orders. The chat window was staffed by something called an assistant, which apologized frequently, which said it understood how frustrating this must be, which was very sorry, which used his name, and which, when he asked it to escalate his case to a human being, told him that his case had been escalated to the appropriate team, and that the appropriate team would review it, and that reviews typically take 2-3 business days, and that he would not be able to submit another request while this one was pending, and thanked him for his understanding. He tried the phone. There was a number deep in the help pages and he called it, and it was a machine, and the machine offered him a menu, and none of the options on the menu described his situation, and when he pressed the option for something else, the machine told him in a warm, recorded voice that for faster service he should visit the help center online, and then it hung up. It hung up on him. He stood in his apartment holding a phone that had ended his call, and he laughed once, a short, ugly sound, and then he stopped because the laugh had frightened him. It was around this time that a man named Vale contacted him, and Vale was the first human being, or the first thing presenting as a human being. K was no longer fully certain of the distinction, to enter the process from the inside. Vale found him on a forum in a thread where K had posted at last in exhausted defeat the whole story. Vale's message was private and it was warm and it was knowing. "I saw your post," it said. "I've been where you are. Most people never get their accounts back because they go about it completely wrong. They keep filing appeals, which just resets your place in the queue every time and flags you as a repeat contact, which actually hurts you. There's a process. I know the process. I've helped a lot of people. Happy to walk you through it, no charge for the first call." K, who 2 weeks earlier would have deleted this message as an obvious fraud, called Vale that evening. This is worth pausing on. The reasonable, orderly, well-regarded senior analyst, the man who trusted that system's work, had been reduced in 14 days to a man calling a stranger from a forum in the hope of learning the secret rules. And Vale was good. Vale was plausible and calm and full of specifics. He spoke of trust and safety teams and reinstatement tiers, and the difference between an algorithmic flag and a human review. And he explained that case error had been to appeal at all. Never appeal. Appealing tells the system you're contesting, and contesting reads as guilt. You have to make them come to you. And he explained that there were people, insiders, former employees, who could sometimes get eyes on a case, and that this was not cheap but that it worked. And that the first thing K needed to understand was that the official process was not the real process, that the rectangles and the forms and the assistant were a front-of-house system, designed to exhaust people into giving up, and that the real decisions happened somewhere else, somewhere with no login page, and that the only way to reach that somewhere was through people like him. So there are people, Kay said, real people making these decisions. Of course there are people, Vale said, and something in his voice was almost pitying. There's always people. You've just never been allowed to meet them. That's the whole design. You think all this, and Kay could hear him gesture at the entire apparatus, the rectangles, the 3 a.m. timestamps, the assistant, the hung-up phone. You think that's an accident. That's not broken, my friend. That's working exactly as intended. The confusion is the product. And Kay, standing in his darkening apartment, holding the phone, felt the thin, cold thread go through him again, because Vale had said the thing he had been circling for 2 weeks without daring to think, and it was somehow far worse to hear it confirmed by a knowledgeable insider than it had been to fear it alone. The machine was not failing to explain itself. The machine was succeeding at not explaining itself. The absence of a reason was not a gap in the process. The absence of a reason was the process. "What did I do?" Kay asked. It came out smaller than he intended. "You've seen a lot of these. What do you think I actually did?" There was a pause on the line. "Does it matter?" Vale said, not unkindly. "Honestly, at this point, does it matter what you did?" Another pause. "Most people I talk to, by the time they get to me, they've stopped asking that. You want my real advice? Stop trying to find out what you did. That road doesn't go anywhere. Start thinking about what you're willing to do to get out. Those are very different questions, and only one of them has an answer." Kay did not sleep that night. He lay in the dark and he did the thing Vale had told him not to do, the thing the machine's silence had been training him to do since 7:14 a.m. on the first morning. He went back through his own life. He scrolled in his memory, since he could no longer scroll in the account itself, through 9 years of things he had posted and things he had liked and things he had said in messages he'd assumed were private, looking with a growing and terrible diligence for the crime. A joke that could be read the wrong way, an opinion that had aged badly, a photograph with something in the background, a person he'd argued with who might have reported him out of spite, a word, somewhere in 9 years that a system somewhere had found and flagged and weighed and judged and found final, no appeal for his own protection wanting. He found 40 things. That was the horror of the exercise, and Kay understood, lying there at 3 a.m., the machine hour, that this was not because he was guilty. It was because anyone who searches 9 years of their own life for a crime will find 40. The searching produces the crimes. He had done nothing, and he could not stop finding evidence that he had done everything, and somewhere in that gap, between the nothing he had done and the everything he could now imagine having done, the machine had already won, weeks ago, without ever once telling him his charge. Chapter 3: The Ones Who Know the System. Kay paid Vale. Of course he paid Vale. The first call had been free, as promised, and it had done its work, which was to convince him that a free road existed and that he was too far down it to turn back, and the second call was not free, and neither was any call after that. The money was not at first ruinous. That was part of the design too, Kay came to understand much later when understanding could no longer help him. Vale never asked for a large sum. He asked for small sums, reasonable sums, each attached to a plausible next step, a case review by an insider contact, a priority resubmission, a document that had to be notarized against the identity flag. Each was affordable. Each was the last one. Each produced, a few days later, not a resolution but a development. And the development always required one more step. And the steps led not toward the exit but deeper in a spiral that felt, at every single point along it, completely reasonable, so that Kay could never identify the moment at which a reasonable man being helped had become a desperate man being farmed. And Vale was not, Kay slowly realized, even the worst of it, because Vale at least did things, or seemed to. Vale had rivals, other guides, and Kay in his desperation began consulting them too, and this was how he came to understand the true shape of the world he had fallen into. There was an entire economy down here. beneath the pale gray rectangles, beneath the assistant that was very sorry, beneath the phone that hung up, there was a whole thriving industry of people who made their living not from the machine, but from its victims, reinstatement consultants, appeal writing services, trust and safety advisors, men who sold courses on the secret rules, forums where the permanently locked out taught each other rituals that had, allegedly, once worked for someone. None of them could open the door. That was the thing Kay finally grasped, sitting up one night surrounded by the browser tabs of a dozen such services. None of them had ever opened the door. They could not, because the door was not a thing that opened. It was a thing that was closed. That was the entire nature of it. But a closed door with a desperate crowd in front of it is a business, and they had all, every one of them, gone into that business, and they fed on the exact hope they were selling. And the hope never ran out because the door never opened, and the crowd never stopped arriving. The consultant Kay saw last was a woman who called herself only by a first name, Chili, and who was different from the others because she did not pretend. She worked when he finally reached her, out of a business that on paper did something else entirely, and she agreed to meet him, actually meet him in person, which none of the others had ever offered, in the back of a coffee place. And she looked at his case for a long time on her own laptop, scrolling, her face giving nothing. And then she closed the laptop and she told him the truth, which was the cruelest thing anyone had done to him yet. "I can't get it back," she said. "I want to be straight with you because everybody you've talked to has been lying, and I'm tired of watching people like you get bled out one payment at a time. Nobody can get it back. Not me, not Vale especially not. Vale is a leech. Whatever he told you was theater. Here's what actually happened to you as best anyone can tell from the outside." She opened the laptop again. "Something flagged you. Could have been a report, one person. Could have been someone with a grudge. Could have been a bot mistaking you for someone else. Could have been a keyword you tripped in a message. Could have been that your posting pattern one week looked statistically like a pattern they associate with spam accounts. Nobody knows. Not me. And here's the part you're not going to like: a probably nobody at the company knows either." Kay looked at her. "That's the thing people can't accept," Chili went on gently, watching him not accept it. "You keep looking for the person who decided. You've spent, 6 weeks looking for the room where someone looked at your case and decided. There's no room. There's no someone. A model flagged you, and a second model reviewed the flag, and the careful review in your email was a third model. And the human, if a human ever touched it at all, spent about 4 seconds and clicked whatever the model recommended because they process 900 of these a day, and clicking uphold is safe and clicking reverse is the one that gets them audited. There is no reason for what happened to you. Not a hidden reason. Not a secret reason you could find if you dug. No reason. A reason is a thing a mind produces, and no mind was ever fully present in your case at any point. You're demanding an explanation from a process that is not the kind of thing that has explanations. That's why you can't find the door. You keep looking for the door because you assume the building was built by someone who put a door in it. Nobody built this building. It grew." "Then how do I get out?" Kay said. Chili looked at him with something close to pity and closed the laptop for the last time. "You don't get out," she said. "You get used to it. You build a life around the hole where the account was. People do. You lose the 9 years, you lose your sister's messages, you make a new account under a slightly different name, and you're careful this time. You're so careful you self-censor everything. You become a small, quiet, frightened version of yourself online forever. And that fear, that's the only sentence that ever actually gets carried out. That's the punishment, not the ban. The ban is nothing, the ban is just an event. The punishment is what the ban turns you into. The punishment is that from now on, forever, some part of you is standing in front of that machine trying to prove it's good." She stood and gathered her things. "I'm not going to charge you. Go home. Stop paying people. Grieve it like a death because that's what it is, and then live around it. That's the only honest advice in this whole industry, and it's why I'm the only one in it who's poor." Left, and Kay sat in the back of the coffee place for a long time, and he did not feel relieved to have finally heard the truth, because the truth was worse than any lie Vale had told. Vale's lies had at least contained a door. The truth contained none. And still, this was the part that frightened him most about himself. Still, even now, even having been told plainly by the one honest person in the whole apparatus that there was no reason and no room and no door, some part of him did not believe her. Some part of him walked home already composing his next appeal. The good one, the one that would finally explain, the one that would reach the person he was still certain, against all evidence, must be in there somewhere, waiting to be reached by a man reasonable enough and patient enough and innocent enough to deserve it. He was going to keep knocking. He knew it about himself, walking home. He was going to keep knocking on a door that opened onto nothing, for as long as he lived, because the alternative, that there was no one on the other side, that there had never been anyone, that he had been found guilty by nobody of nothing and would remain so forever, was the one sentence a reasonable man cannot serve. Chapter 4: The Parable. Near the end, when Kay had stopped paying the consultants and had not yet stopped hoping, which is the longest and worst phase and the one most people live in permanently, he had a conversation that he did not seek out and could not forget. It happened in the least likely place. His employer, aware in a general way that Kay was having some account trouble, had assigned him to accompany a client, a foreign visitor, an important one, on a tour of the city, a soft task given to a man who was clearly not fully himself. The tour included, of all things, a great old cathedral, the kind that is on tourist itineraries not for its faith but for its ceiling, and it was there, in the vast, dim, empty stone quiet of it, waiting for a client who never arrived and had perhaps never intended to, that a man approached Kay. The man was old and unremarkable and might have been a docent or a caretaker or nothing at all. He seemed to know who Kay was, though Kay had never seen him. He said, without introduction, in the tone of a man resuming a conversation rather than beginning one, "You're still trying to get in, aren't you? Still filing?" Kay did not ask how he knew. By this point in his life, he had stopped asking how anyone knew anything. "Let me tell you something," the old man said. "Since you'll believe a stranger in a church before you'll believe the truth, there was a system. And a man came to the system, an ordinary man, and he wanted access to what was rightfully his. He was sure it was rightful, he'd done nothing wrong. And at the entrance to the system there was a gatekeeper, not a person exactly, a page, a form, a gray rectangle with a button on it. And the man pressed the button and the rectangle said, 'Not now. Not yet, your request is being reviewed. Come back later.' So the man came back later, and the rectangle said the same thing. 'Not now, not yet, under review.' And the man was reasonable, so he waited and he came back and he filed and he appealed and he waited, and each time the rectangle told him the same thing, always almost admitting him, always review pending, never no, because if it had ever once said no cleanly, finally no, and here is why, the man could have grieved it and walked away and lived. But it never said no. It said not yet. It said we'll get back to you. It said thank you for your patience. And so the man could not leave, because a thing that has not said no might still say yes, and he had done nothing wrong, and surely, if he was patient enough and reasonable enough and good enough, the button would one day let him through. And the man waited at that rectangle for the rest of his life. He grew old in front of it. He spent everything he had, his money on the consultants, his nights on the appeals, his mind on the search for what he'd done. He became, by the end, a person who existed only as a petitioner, a man defined entirely by the door he was trying to enter, until he could no longer remember who he'd been before he was a case. And at the very end, when he was dying in front of the rectangle, he asked it one last question. He said, "In all these years, no one else has ever come to this gate demanding entry. How is that possible? Everyone wants access. Why has no one else come?" And the gatekeeper, the rectangle, the button, the machine, whatever it was, leaned close, because the man's hearing was going, and it said, "No one else could be admitted here because this gate was made only for you. It was always only about you, and now I'm going to close it." The old man stopped. The cathedral was very quiet. Somewhere far up in the dark, the ceiling held its ceilingness, indifferent, admired by tourists, meaning nothing. "I don't understand," Kay said. "If the gate was only for him, then it was rightfully his. He was right to wait." "You could read it that way," the old man agreed. "Or the gate was a trap," Kay said. "Built for him alone, to hold him alone, so that he'd waste his whole life at a door that was never going to open, a door that existed only to occupy him." "You could read it that way too." "Then which is it?" Kay said, and heard his own voice rise and break in the enormous stone quiet. Was he right to wait, or was he a fool? Was the gate his by right, or was it built to destroy him? Which one is it? The old man looked at him with an expression that was not unkind and was not going to help him. "That's the whole point," he said. "You still think it has to be one or the other. You still think there's an answer, and that if you were just reasonable enough, you'd find it. But the story doesn't have an answer, and neither does yours, and neither will anything the machine ever does to you, and that is the thing it did to you, not the ban, not the money, not the 9 years. It made you into a man who needs an answer from a thing that doesn't produce them. You'll spend your life demanding a verdict, guilty so you can atone, innocent so you can be free, and it will never give you either, because it isn't withholding the verdict. There is no verdict. There was never a verdict. There was only ever the waiting, and what the waiting turns a man into." And he walked away across the stone, unremarkable, and Kay never saw him again, and could never afterward be certain the man had been there at all, whether he had been a caretaker, or another victim gone strange, or something Kay's own exhausted mind had assembled out of 6 weeks of gray rectangles into a shape that could finally say aloud the thing Kay had been unable to say to himself. Chapter 5, a year later. It ended the way these things end, which is to say it did not end. There was no verdict and no acquittal and no door and no room and no person, and so there was nothing for it to do but continue, quietly, indefinitely, at a lower and lower volume, until continuing became a life. A year passed. Kay was, by any external measure, fine. This is the part that no one who has not been through it understands, and the part that everyone who has been through it recognizes instantly. He still had his job. He still had his apartment. He had rebuilt most of the practical infrastructure, new logins, new keys, new accounts, patched together over months of dull administrative labor. Each service reconnected one at a time to a new center that he guarded now with a wariness that never switched off. He had, in the flat language of the consultants, moved on. If you had met him at a dinner, you would have found a competent, orderly, well-regarded man, perhaps a little quieter than the average, perhaps a little slow to say what he thought, but nothing you could name. What you could not have seen was that he had become the man usually described in the back of the coffee place, and that he had become him exactly, down to the smallest detail, and that the becoming had been so gradual that he had never once felt it happen. He self-censored now. Not dramatically, he did not think of it as censorship, he thought of it as being sensible, being careful, being the kind of person who does not get flagged. Before he posted anything anywhere, a small process ran in him, a private review board, and it asked, how could this be read by someone looking for a reason? How could this be reported, misunderstood, taken out of context, flagged by a model that does not know me? And most things did not survive the review board, and so he posted almost nothing now, and what he did post was smooth and cautious and empty, scrubbed of anything a machine could catch on, which meant scrubbed of anything that had been his. He had built, without deciding to, an internal version of the machine, the same silent, reasonless, guilty until proven tribunal, and installed it inside himself, where it ran now for free, 24 hours a day, judging him against a guideline he had never been shown, on behalf of an authority he had never met, for his own protection. That was the sentence. Chile had told him, and he had not believed her, and she had been exactly right. The ban had been nothing, an event, a Tuesday, a gray rectangle. The punishment was what the ban had turned him into, A man standing, permanently, quietly, for the rest of his life in front of a machine trying to prove that he was good. He carried the courtroom with him now. He was the courtroom now. There was no longer any need for them to watch him, because he watched himself, more carefully and more constantly and more mercilessly than any model ever could. And he would go on watching himself, in that small, crouched, frightened posture, until he died. And the machine, which had never known his name, which had processed him in 4 seconds a year ago, and moved on to the next 900, had achieved this total and permanent occupation of a human interior at no ongoing cost to itself whatsoever, which is the most efficient thing a system has ever done. Chapter 6: The End. The end, when it came so quietly and so administratively that Kay almost missed it. It was not dramatic. It was an email arriving at 3:02 a.m., the machine hour, the same hour, and he noticed the hour this time and felt nothing, because he had stopped being able to be surprised by anything the machine did. It came from the original company, the first one, the account he had long since given up as dead, buried, grieved. He read it in the gray light of the following morning, standing in his kitchen in the exact spot where he had read the first notice 14 months before, holding a phone, a competent, orderly, well-regarded man, and the email said in full, "Good news, we've completed a review of your account and determined that the suspension may have been applied in error. Your account has been reinstated. We apologize for any inconvenience. Thank you for your patience." That was all. No explanation of what the error had been. No account of what he had been alleged to do or who had reviewed it, or why, after 14 months of this decision is final, it had been quietly reversed at 3 a.m. with a cheerful good news and an exclamation point. No acknowledgement that 14 months had passed, that money had been spent, that a sister's 9 years of messages had in the meantime been permanently deleted under a data retention policy and could not be restored by any reinstatement. Just, may have been applied in error, reinstated. We apologize for any inconvenience. Thank you for your patience. And here is the thing that Kay understood in that kitchen, the last thing he ever understood, the thing that finished him, not with a bang, not with a struggle, but the way everything in this whole affair had happened, quietly, administratively, without anyone in the room. The reinstatement was not a victory. The reinstatement was the verdict, and the verdict was the worst possible one, because it was no verdict at all. If they had upheld the ban forever, he could have hated them, could have been the wronged man, could have built a life on the clean fuel of injustice. If they had said you did this specific thing and here is why it was wrong, he could have argued it or atoned for it and either way been told, been given the dignity of a charge. But this may have been applied in error. This told him the final truth, the one the old man in the cathedral had told him, and the one Chile had told him, and the one he had refused for 14 months to believe, that it had never been about him at all, that there had been no reason for the ban and there was no reason for the reversal, that a model had flagged him and a model had unflagged him, and in neither direction had a mind ever been fully present, and that the entire apparatus of his suffering, the appeals, the consultants, the search through 9 years of his life for a crime, the internal tribunal he had built and would carry to his grave, had been erected by him, entirely by him, in front of a gate that was never guarding anything, in response to a machine that had never been thinking about him at all. He had spent 14 months trying to prove to someone that he was good, and the someone had never existed, and now the someone had said, without ever having existed, never mind. He looked at the good news for a long time, then he pressed the button that let him back in. His account opened the photographs, the years, the smooth, empty infrastructure of a life, and it was all there exactly the same, and he scrolled through it slowly in the gray kitchen light, and he felt nothing, or rather he felt the one thing left to feel, which was the recognition that the man who could have been made happy by getting this back had been quietly executed 14 months ago, on an ordinary Tuesday, by a gray rectangle. and that what remained standing in the kitchen holding the phone was only the case, only the file, only the small, careful, frightened thing the process had grown in the man's place, and that this thing did not want the account back and did not want anything back and would go on, now reinstated, restored, apologized to, thanked for its patience, forever proving to no one that it was good. He did not close the account. That would have been a decision and a gesture and a meaning, and he understood now that the machine did not deal in those and that he no longer did either. He simply put the phone down, face up this time, its little screen bright and open and full of his restored life, and he went to work on time, competent and orderly and well-regarded, a man to whom nothing anymore could be said to have happened. Like a dog, he might have said, if he had been the kind of man who still said things. But he wasn't, and he didn't, and that, the not saying, the smooth silence where a man's last words should have been, was the shame of it, and it was the only verdict he would ever receive, and it would outlive him. The end.